So I've been asked to talk about effective communication today, which is a really important topic in anything you do in life, right? Whether you're going to be a doctor, a engineer, a leader, a parent, a friend, effective communication is the name of the game, right? So, so I'm going to approach it perhaps a little bit differently, and basically in the way that I learned how things are done here in industry. But let me tell you a story first. So, when I was in college, I was in my senior year taking a class in systolic arrays. It's some weird thing in computer science that I was taking, very difficult. And I remember a particular test that I studied really, really hard for. And then I took the test. I knew how to do all the answers, but I couldn't have enough time to finish it. So I did problem number one, and I thought I got it right. I did problem number two, I thought I got it right. And I was starting problem number three, but I did not have time. I had like 5 minutes. So I wrote down what I was going to do in problem number three, and I gave it to the professor, and I said, I know this problem, I just don't have time, right? So he took the class. So obviously, 2 out of 3 is a pretty bad grade, right? And then I went to his office and said, well, really, do you know the third problem? He asked me. I said, yeah, I think I do. So he asked me, okay, do the problem on the board. So I did the problem on the board, and I got it right. And he says, I'm going to give you partial credit because you know it, but you were not fast enough. I remember that professor told me, Frank, just one advice. Please be a test engineer or a quality engineer, but don't be a design engineer because you're too slow. And that really bothered me. That just bothered me. From my head to my toe. And now I'm the design manager for 1,000 people at Broadcom, right? And I went to see that professor and I told him, thank you for telling me that because you challenged me to do what you thought that I couldn't. But at the same time, maybe to tell that to people, instead of getting the reaction of getting riled up and getting more excited to do something, you could actually bring that down. So he's like, oh, I don't even remember telling you that, right? But I remember, right? So his communication was effective to me, but was not necessarily effective to everybody else. So that's what we're going to talk about. But he was being honest, right? So we're going to talk about that part as well. So the first thing I want to talk about, communication, is going to be credibility, right? So let me ask you this: how do you know if somebody's telling you the truth? You meet somebody, you talk to them for 2, 3 hours, you don't know them very well, but you talk to them for 2, 3 hours, maybe 4 hours. How do you know if this person is telling you the truth? What is something common about people that tend to tell the truth? Think about that. And we'll talk a little bit more about this question. So one thing that I notice when I meet with customers, when I meet with vendors, when I meet with people that are trying to sell us technology is I count how many important things they tell me. And I count how many of those are positive. If they're all positive, I know they're lying. Uh, the world, it doesn't work like that, right? So if you're talking to somebody, it's a professor, it could be a friend, it could be somebody that's selling you something, somebody that's presenting something, everything they tell you is positive, especially if it's something difficult, then that person is lying. So one of the things that I try to do in my communication with people, with customers, or with my engineers or anybody when I talk to them is I always tell them, these 3 things are positive. These 3 things are challenges and problems that we have. And the minute you share negative things with people, they trust you because they know you're not hiding anything. And in fact, human beings, we have been raised in school so that if we don't hear everything that we need to hear, we tend to imagine the worst, right? So when engineers, typically we are trained to design for worst case. We design a chip so it works at the lowest voltage, it works at the worst temperature, it works at the worst situation. So we try to design it. So when we don't know the data, we assume the worst. We assume, oh, it's probably the worst temperature. It's probably a really slow part. It's probably a really, the reliability is low. So we try to design a chip that works in every single case. Right? Human beings, in a way, we've been designed the same way. When we do not hear all the information, we assume the worst. And sometimes we don't make very optimal decisions. Right? So by communicating with people the reality of something, the good and the bad, then people don't have to imagine the worst. They go ahead and just immediately connect on what to do. So that's one thing I would encourage you is when you communicate, when you're interviewing, when you're communicating, when you're presenting something, when you're talking to your boss, when you're talking to your professor, when you're talking to anybody who's going to have authority over you or going to have some sort of there's something you need from them. To build trust, make sure you always communicate a mixture of the good things and the bad things. And you will immediately have trust. Right? Now, you got to make sure that when you communicate the negative things, you have to show capability and you have faith and you have the ability to go ahead and solve those problems. And that is when communication becomes leadership. Right? So let's talk a little bit about that. Leadership is about showing a situation and showing people how you have mastery of what's going on, the positive and the negative, and then you're showing them how you're going to overcome the negative things. That could be in school, in medicine, biology, engineering. It doesn't matter, right? So that's very, very, very key, right? The other thing I want to talk about, a little bit about communication is what I learned over the 20 years I worked here is that the most important part about communication is listening. Is the absolutely number one part of communication is making sure you listen. Right? So typically, when I meet with a customer that has a concern, the first thing I do is I ask them what they're worried about. And they tell me. And it could take them 5 minutes, it could take them 60 minutes, it could take them 60 seconds to tell me what they're worried about. But as soon as they're done, I basically repeat that. I said, what you're concerned about is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. And I repeat what they said. And they either correct me or they go ahead and say, yes, that's what I'm concerned about. And the minute that they tell me that those are the things that they're concerned about, even if I disagree with those things, I repeat that, right? I repeat what's on their mind. Then they're ready to listen. In fact, if you know a professor, if you know a friend, if you know somebody that you're working with where you want to try to convince them to do something, and they have some view of something, the first thing you need to do is ask them, please tell me what you think. Please tell me your concern. And listen to them without interruption. Summarize what they told you. And I can guarantee you, for the next 30 seconds after you summarize what they told you, they are going to listen. Maybe just for 30 seconds, but they're going to listen. And this is extremely, extremely true with people that tend to be pretty dominating and powerful. If you're talking to a CEO, if you're talking to a manager of a bank, if you're talking to somebody that's in charge of a large group, right? They tend to have ideas that are strong. So the stronger the person is, the more sometimes they tend to listen to themselves. So if you go ahead and repeat what they said, and for 30 seconds you have time to give them your message, and then listen for those 30 seconds. So the other thing that I learned about communication is sometimes communication is about convincing somebody of something, convincing a professor to give you a better grade, convincing somebody to give you a job, convincing somebody to invest money in your company, convince somebody to stop doing something, right? How do you persuade somebody to do something like that, right? So what I learned is, first you listen, you summarize their concerns, and then you very briefly explain why you believe what you believe. And then you ask them if they understood what you said. And if they repeat something completely different, that means that we're not listening. So you try it again until you can actually hear the idea that you have, right? But there are some people that are very difficult to convince, and one of those is my boss. Right, my boss is a CEO, therefore tremendously successful, and I work with a lot of people where they're very difficult to convince. So one way that sometimes I try to persuade them to do what I think was the right thing for the business, the right thing for the people, the right thing for the company, in some cases the right thing for the country, right, is to communicate with questions. If they tell me, hey, Frank, we want to do this, and if I say, no, I don't think that's a good idea because this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, then they immediately have an answer to all these things of why something that counteracts what I'm saying, right? But when I ask them, oh, that's what you're thinking. Hey, what do you think is going to happen when we do this? And I follow up with another question. What do you think the customer is going to think after we say that? And what do you think is going to be the long-term consequence of that? Then they convince themselves in their own words that that was a bad idea, or that was a good idea, right? Because the more power people have, the more they tend to listen to what they're saying. So this idea is called seeding, like a seed, right? If you give a plant to somebody that is a gardener, they reject it because I'm a gardener, I do plants better than anybody else. So what you do is you give them a seed and you let them grow. You plant the thought and you let them finish. Or you try to get your point through a question. And the smarter the person is, the faster they're going to get to that point. And it's going to become more their idea, their conclusion. So those are some of the few things that I used in my career to survive the past 20 years, right? And it's 20 years ago, I was basically exactly kind of where you guys are right now. So, so that's kind of what I can share. Some pretty simple stories, and now I'll give that time back to Mike for any questions or any comments.
Okay. So we have questions for Frank.
I got a question.
Please do.
So I really like all those ideas and how we can become more effective communicators. What do you do if the person you're talking to, if they aren't a good communicator? I think I've run into that sometimes where I can try to communicate well, but it's not working the other way.
Wow, that's a very good question. My suggestions are typically to help them by doing the following: is I typically ask somebody, okay, what are the 3 things that you want? I break it down. I create an outline. It says, what are the 3 things that you want, and which one of those 3 are the most important? So when you break it down like that, people tend to start thinking about it, and they start telling you, okay, what I really want is this thing. What's surprising sometimes is the thing that they mention at the end. Or sometimes it's something that they don't even have courage to tell you. But when you go ahead and ask them, hey, what are the 3 things that you want and which one's the more important out of the 3? Then they overcome that shyness, that lack of communication. They tell you, I want you to stop doing this. Or I want you to start doing this. And so if it's ask a question so that you can help them break it down into 3 things, right? And ask for a priority, right? That would be one suggestion. The other suggestion is to say, to just be very frank with them, right? Going back to the being candid and being honest and say, I know you are stressed about this. I know you're concerned about this. I know you're very emotional about this something, but I'm not being able to put down exactly what you want, right? And again, can you please tell me the one thing you want? That's where you start. Instead of 3, the one thing you want. And then they might say, no, I want more things. I understand, but which one is the one thing you want? Right? And then the minute you repeat that one thing, then they're willing to tell you more, right? And to discuss more. Good question.
Thank you. That's very good.
Other questions? I have one, Frank, while they're thinking of it. I know that you're a religious person, and that this course has been, these sessions have attempted to help our participants look at their own spirituality as well as their professional and work life, etc. How would you say effective communication and your spirituality work in your life, right?
I think it's something very important that goes together, right? I think it's not possible to separate who you are from what your job is. Right? I think it's not possible to live your work life and to live your personal life and your church life, whichever church you belong to. It doesn't matter if you're a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Mormon or a Protestant or Catholic. It doesn't matter. Is I think what's important is to be one person and to be the same person at church and the same person at work. But one clear thing about communication there is that there will be times, especially in business, that your principles will contradict a direction that's being taken by the business or by the school or by the institution, right? That's when communication becomes really important, right? And sometimes those moments are persuasive moments. Sometimes they are moments where you get to influence people. Sometimes they are defining moments where your career might go on or might stop there, right? So you got to be careful. Let's talk about the persuasive moments. Is you got an opportunity to make sure that institution is doing the right thing. So you persuade them. You listen, you look at the situations, and you go ahead and share them, right? But they might be on the opposite, some occasions where something's being done that's against your principle, that you just don't do, right? So that's where it's important to say, not to sound self-righteous, just to say, I know this is what's being asked to do. I cannot do that. I cannot participate on that, right? Because it's just not, it's not who I am. It's not what I'm willing to support. So that's called a defining moment. Because at that time, that organization might say, "Wow, you're right. Thank you for showing that up." And then we're going to stop. Or they might say, "Hey, we're going to move forward without you," because right, you obviously don't want to lie. And if that's what's going to happen in that organization, you probably don't want to be participating in that organization anyway, right? And then that's when you have to have the courage to make the right decision. But you gotta be careful because you don't want to sound self-righteous, right? There's a lot of things that are okay, but for other people might not be okay for you, right? But if there's something that is not necessarily right or honest, it's good to stand up. It's been 20 years that I've done that. I'm still here with the same job, right? So you can do it.
Excellent. Thank you. Other questions?
Frank,
Yes.
you talked about being, so if you wanted, for example, you wanted to be an effective communicator, you'd want to outline at the very beginning what the positive and negatives were. But you're talking to your CEO, for example, and you want to influence them, and it's potentially it's a negative situation, so you've outlined positive negatives, and they're not quite keen. Now, this is the CEO, they know the business better than you, they've been in the game longer than you. How do you go about, and you touched on influencing, but how do you go about influencing that person? You talked about the idea of the seed. I guess I'm having difficulty trying to relate that to somebody who has more power, more knowledge, and more maturity in some ways than yourself. How would you bring about a change that you are looking to facilitate within that business?
That's a very, very well put question, right? Your question is basically, you're dealing with somebody that has been very successful. You're dealing with somebody that's been proven, somebody that potentially has an ego, right?
Yeah,
Somebody that has been right a lot of times because that's why they got to that position, whether it's a manager, a CEO, or a director, or anybody there. How do you influence them, right? So there's one thing, nothing replaces track record, right? Nothing replaces track record. So when you get things done, when you produce good results, whether you're a student, a worker, a bus driver, an engineer, a doctor, a businessman, when you constantly produce good results, your ability to convince somebody to do something is 90% better than a new person, right? So I would say the number one rule of effective communication is make sure your credibility is high by having good results. If your credibility is high, then you're there, right? If it's not there, then you're going to have to deal with effective communication with what you have until you get the credibility. Credibility can take a month, it can take a year, it can take 5 years, right? Depends. But that would be the number one thing. Then once you have that credibility, what I would suggest is doing the following. Is, again, you listen, you repeat what they said, you send your message. You try questions to try to direct the person to the answer that you want, right? The other thing that I use is I talk to other people that persuade, right? I can talk to the CFO, I can talk to the HR person, I can talk to one of my peers and say, hey, what do you think about this idea? What do you think about it? And see if they agree. That's powerful because likely people that are very influential, people that are have a lot of power, have a lot of responsibility, they talk to one person, then they call people they trust to check their decision. I know who we trust. I can talk to those 4 or 5 people and say, hey, what do you think about this? If I win those 5 people, I got it. Because once I present my idea and I listen to him, he checks with those 5 people. All 5 are going to tell him it's a good idea. Then his network has been verified. So you need to be very observant. The person that you want to influence, who does he or she listen to? And as part of what you're doing, whether you're selling something, whether you're asking for something, you want to influence those people that surround that person as well. Right? So it might take some coordinated time and patience. You might not want to talk to him or her, the decision maker, until you talk to those other people. So that when you go ahead and send the message, and the message is checked, you get the right feedback from those places. That's what I would do.
Cool, thanks.
That's a great answer. Thank you so very much. I think we're out of time. We certainly appreciate your participation, and thank you for participating in the Launching Leaders course. I'm hoping we'll be able to talk again before you finish, but any last thoughts, Frank, before we go?
I would just say, the best advice that I can tell you from my point of view is, I think very important to be positive, right? To be persistent. When people meet you, they want to make sure that you have the air of somebody that never gives up, that keeps on trying, that's persistent, right? That will give you a lot of advantage in whatever career, whatever endeavor you want to do, right? And that very good to me. I wish you the best on the things that you guys are doing there. You guys you all look very young, and then so I think your futures are very bright there, right? And this is the time to put new habits and to try new things and to define who you are and to not compromise, right? Whatever job you get, make sure that you don't divide yourself between who you are and your job. You're being one person that can have the same principles everywhere you go, right? A real pleasure talking to you guys. Good luck with